Hey guys, how you going? Hope you're all doing very well. This afternoon I'm going to be doing another movie review, so hopefully you find this one interesting. This movie is a horror film from Canada, French language, English subs, released in the year 2017, directed by Marc-André, and this film is called The Ravenous. So The Ravenous is set in a post-apocalyptic world. You've got a zombie virus that has decimated the population, but a small group of survivors have seek refuge in the remote wilderness covered by the woods. So they believe that they're safe, but recently they've spotted a few zombies in the vicinity, and they're getting more and more frequent, so they believe that the zombie horde are gaining in numbers and that they're slowly progressing to this hideout. So they believe that they're no longer safe, so they're going to have to go across country in order to find another safe spot, and along the way they run into some new survivors. Now one of these survivors is a woman that she says she's been bitten on the hand by a dog, but the other survivors believe that she's lying, that she's in fact infected. So there's a lot of paranoia that's starting to suffocate this group, which is the last thing they need because the zombies are hot on their heel and they're only one step behind them. So whether or not this group can actually learn to trust each other and actually last this terrifying battle of survival is something you're going to have to find out for yourself, because that's as far as I'm going with my synopsis. Now my thoughts on The Ravenous. We all know the zombie subgenre is a subgenre that is very lazy. This is a subgenre that really is flogging a cash cow. This is a subgenre that is recycling the ideas made from George A. Romero in the 70s. And so if you've seen one, you've seen them all. Now I love the zombie subgenre. I think that there are a few French horror films that have actually created something a little bit different within the subgenre, but I'm waiting for that film that really revitalizes the subgenre, that actually makes the subgenre worth watching again. And so when I heard that this is a movie that does reinvent it, that it is very creative and very ambitious, I had a lot of expectations coming into The Ravenous. I thought that when I saw the trailer, it looked very intriguing, and I was hoping that the French-Canadian sort of aspect and the fact that it's steering away from Hollywood would actually be enough to get the expectations up. It would actually be enough to get the excitement up, and it was enough to get the excitement up. I was actually expecting something that would blow me away and actually give me renewed hope within this subgenre, that there are directors who are actually trying something a little bit different and not the lazy sort of recycled garbage that you see time and time again. But unfortunately, at the end of the day, I can appreciate the fact that Robin-Aubert is trying something different, but I believe that the ambition gets the better of him, because I thought the lack of execution makes a very frustrating exercise instead of something that you can actually go out there and recommend to all your friends in a very excited way. Now, I'll go into the negatives a little bit later, but I will say that there are positives to The Ravenous, and I think the biggest positive is the overall production of the film, is that it does create a strong sense of horror through the visuals of what you're actually seeing, and it also creates a little bit of thought-provoking material. There are some very strange scenes that happen in this movie that will force you to draw your own conclusions, but there are also the element of cinematography. You've got the beauty of nature, you've got the thriving aspect of nature, and as opposed to the destruction of humanity. And this is something that's very scary, is that when humanity drops, nature will take over, and the beauty of nature will always shine, and the contrasting difference between these two worlds creates a very unnerving feeling that I had from start to finish. I believe that this is set in a post-apocalyptic world. I believed all the hopelessness that these characters were going through is because of that very uneasy quality that Robin-Aubert manages to produce through the screen. It absorbs the viewer, it goes through the screen, and it engulfs the viewer to a point where I felt very claustrophobic. I felt as though there was no safe spot where these characters could go to, and so the overall uneasy feeling is complemented by a very good soundtrack that I thought contributed in a very effective way, that sense of sadness, that sense of terror, and I thought the overall suspense in the movie was through the roof. Now this is a movie that really gets the viewer based on their senses. It's not a movie that hits you on the visual sense, it's a movie that hits you on your hearing and the sense of what's around the corner. Now, but to me, the most terrifying thing in a horror film is not knowing what's out there, is that a lot of people need visuals and a lot of people need a lot of gore to get scared, but for me, it's not knowing what's out there, it's using your imagination. The movie forces the viewer to use their imagination quite considerably in this movie, which is what makes it very scary. There's one scene in particular involving mousetraps that I'm not going to go into, but I thought that was incredibly effective. It's one of my favourite scenes in a movie in a very long time, is because it uses something so subtle, and that subtlety is not trying to force, it's not trying to exaggerate that horror aspect, therefore it makes it even more terrifying. And so there are other aspects of the film that I thought were very terrifying. There was just some scenes where, whether or not it's just a shot of a zombie, that just made me feel very uneasy because it feels so natural. It feels as though it's not trying too hard to actually scare the viewer, therefore it comes across as a lot more impactful. And you've also got some very good gore scenes that are even more impactful due to the fact that the gore scenes are a result of all the tension that has been built up. And so this is very effective in what it's using. It's not just using gore for the sake of gore with no build-up. The build-up actually creates that higher impact when the actual gory scenes actually happen, is because it's a slow burn tension as far as the overall result, what's behind the corner, and all of a sudden the director is taking you on this journey where you feel as though you can't take any more. You have to peer around the corner, but the director is taking a very deliberate, slow approach to actually get the nerds up to a point where when it blows all over and basically the gore happens, it just creates that sense that, okay, that was a lot more impactful than it would be if I didn't actually have to wait for the blood and guts. And so that was all very good. So it is, as I said, it's a very effective horror film, and there are some very bizarre scenes in the film that actually create that sense that, okay, the director is trying something a little bit different, but the problem with the difference in the film is that there is not really a lot of indication as to what the director is trying to do. Now, I love films that are ambiguous. I love films that force you to use your own mind, but in this movie, there's not enough indication to allow that sort of interpretation to happen. And so what I mean by that is that ambiguity is all about not tying up loose ends, but there are some clues as to what it could be about, therefore you can go and make your own interpretation. But in this movie, it doesn't really do that. It just leaves you scratching your head, and it becomes a frustrating exercise instead of an exercise that it wants to be. And so I think the ambition of the film is a little bit too weird for its own good, and I think the weirdness of the film is actually a compensation, and it's trying to distract the viewer from the very paper-thin story and the very paper-thin characters that the movie has. And this is by far the biggest negative to the film, is that these characters just have nothing to them. The actors are actually very competent, but they have nothing to work with because the script is very bad. The script doesn't allow these characters to develop into anyone that you can relate to. These are characters that you don't know any more about from the start than when you do when you come to the end. So you never feel like you're on a journey with them. You just feel like you're a spectator watching something really bad happening, watching the visuals and actually creating something that you can go through yourself, as opposed to actually sympathizing with other people. And so you've got the characters that I just didn't care about whatsoever. I didn't care whether or not they lived or died. So there's a strong level of superficiality to the film. There's a strong level of 2D sort of cardboard cutout element that does prevent the film from being the movie that it wants. It wants to be this really ambitious film, but unfortunately the ambition is compensating for the fact that it just doesn't have anything in story. There's basically just wandering around aimlessly, not knowing where to go. And so the characters in this film, they're wandering around aimlessly, but I also thought that was a double meaning for the director not knowing where to go with the film exactly. So the director just feels like he's roaming the countryside and not knowing what the next move is going to be. So he's just going to splash some really weird stuff in there, and that's going to be something that's going to be that reinvent the zombie subgenre. But in the end of the day, does it really reinvent the zombie subgenre? Because there are a lot of generic elements the movie has, and unfortunately that is the biggest problem to the film, and that does prevent me from being excited and really going out there and recommending it to everyone out there. So overall, The Ravenous is definitely not a terrible horror film. If you are a fan of zombie subgenre, then definitely go out there and see it. But for me, I just wanted a lot more considering the expectations I had at the start. So overall, for The Ravenous, going to give this one 2.5 stars. Still go out there and see it, but don't get your hopes up too high. Alright guys, that's it for my review. Hope you enjoyed it. Till next time, keep watching movies, and I'll see you later.